Hello everyone, welcome. Welcome to another great Endgame session. I've got on the table tonight a recent game. It was played in January between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Christoph Duda. Hello Unknown Shores, welcome. This game was played in the Weichensee tournament in January 2019, and I think it's a very instructive endgame. So why don't we dive right in and take a look. Actually, before I do that, do you guys hear the music? Doesn't seem like the audio is going through to you guys. Let me confirm that. Ear set, okay. Yeah, I didn't think you guys were hearing the music. Hold on here, guys. Interesting that that doesn't seem. Let me fix that, guys. It's nice to have some background music. How are you doing today, Unknown Shorts? How's the snow? You guys hanging in there? Let's try adding an existing source. Okay. Interesting that it's not picking up. Oh, wait a minute now. There we go. I think you guys should have music now. Let me know if that's any better, guys. Okay. So let's get into this endgame. So Magnus Carlsen was white, and Jan Christoph Duda was black. And we notice both sides have 3 pawns, as I've highlighted right there. Each side has 1 rook. And the difference between the sides, white has 2 minor pieces, while black has a rook. And we're going to see how Magnus Carlsen shows in this game how powerful the 2 pieces can be over a rook. Because if you quantify the material, knights are often given 3 points, bishops are often counted as 3 points, and the rook is 5. So 6 points over 5, it doesn't sound like it's a very large difference. But we're going to see how the 2 pieces work well in concert with each other and overcome the black rook in this endgame. I think this is a very instructive endgame. So we pick it up at this point. So Duda with the 2 rooks, he wants to get his second rook onto the 7th rank, where it could potentially exercise some danger towards white's king. And now Carlsen offers to trade one of the rooks, because it's much easier for Carlsen to convert this endgame if he's just dealing with the minor pieces against the rook. The 2 rooks makes it a little more complicated. Hello, 3M1. Yes, 6 is greater than 5. That is correct. But we're going to see that it does make a huge difference. So Duda correctly keeps his rook on the board. So he has 2 rooks. He wants to create as many problems for white as he can. So one way to do that is to keep both rooks on. Okay, a4. So right there, Carlsen, he has this passed pawn. Ideally, he would like to get a queen. And so he's just advancing it, and he's also securing the bishop with the pawn. So Duda wants to free up the pawn a little bit, so he forces white to move his bishop in hope that one day he can snap this pawn off the board. Okay, so let's see. Duda is going to advance his pawns, logical thinking. Get our kings towards the middle, that's what Carlsen is thinking. Your king is an important piece in the endgame, guys. So we're going to see Duda is going to bring his king towards the middle eventually. Okay, bishop to d1. This is an interesting maneuver that Carlsen undertakes. He just wants to hold this pawn with his bishop so that he can move his knight. Because right now, if the knight were to move, the knight was the only defender of this pawn. So that's why he's moving the bishop here, just to hold on to this pawn. And he's going to repurpose the knight. He's going to relocate the knight. So Duda has his pawns coming down the board. Whenever you have a passed pawn, and his e-pawn is passed because there's no d-pawn for white and there's no f-pawn for white. So this pawn that black has cannot be captured by one of white's pawn. So that's why it's called a passed pawn. So anytime you have a passed pawn, guys, you want to advance it further down the board in hopes of making a queen. Okay, here we go. Carlsen, he's rerouting the knight. Moving our king closer to the center. And this shows another strategy that is common in endgames. You want to support your passed pawn with your rook behind the pawn. So ideally white wants to move this pawn down the board and make a queen, and it's supported by his rook behind the pawn. If the rook was in front of the pawn, it would get in the pawn's way. So let's just imagine the rook was on a7. The pawn would eventually get to a6. It couldn't get to a7 because its rook is in the way. So the general rule of thumb in endgames is put your rook behind the passed pawn. So Duda is attacking the bishop, and Carlsen just protects the bishop. So it's very interesting endgames thus far. White has a passer that is well defended. He has a rook behind his passer, and he's all set to push it down the board. But at the same token, black has two active rooks, and he's got his passer coming down the board too. So let's see how things play out. G3. Okay, that's a good move. Not only does it exercise influence over the f4 square, preventing a future f4, but if white wants to move his knight into the f4 square, then his knight will be protected. So Duda is bringing his king close to the action, which is exactly what you want to do. You want to have an active king in the endgame, guys. Your king is a useful piece. It can defend, and it can also take away some squares. So right now, the king is taking away the d4 square from the knight. Hey, Bertrout! Nice! Fork, yeah! Nice to see you, Bertrout. Okay, so Carlsen, he's getting this pawn rolling now. So he's got two passers that black will have to deal with. Those are some very serious pawns. Okay, so black decides he's going to prevent white from further moving his a-pawn. So Carlsen moves the other pass pawn. He's like, okay, you stop my a-pawn. Let's get the h-pawn down the board. And Duda decides to move his pawn further, get it into the action, also taking away the d4 square from the knight. So perhaps with the pawn holding on to the d4 square, that will allow black's king to come over here and munch on the pawn. Hello, Ishchess. Welcome. Welcome to another episode of Great Endgames. We're looking at Magnus Carlsen against Jan-Christoph Duda. This was in January at the Tata Steel tournament. Okay, so Carlsen's king wasn't doing very much. It was the bishop was pinned to the king. The bishop was not allowed to move, so he just gets the king out of that pin, and perhaps he'll move his king up here one day to look at some of these vital squares. Okay, Duda pushes c4. I'm a little surprised by that. But maybe he's thinking of taking away that square from the bishop. I would have thought it would be better to leave the pawn on c5 to take away the d4 square, but hey, what do I know? He's the GM. Okay, so now Carlsen is starting to untangle. He's got his rook behind the passer. He's got his other passer going up the board. The only problem with his position now is that his bishop and his knight are they're not really doing much. So Carlsen has navigated his king over to kick the rook, and once the rook leaves the white camp, Carlsen will be able to move his minor pieces. King up the board. Okay, so they're just playing tickle here. Hey, we got a follow, Deadman001. Thanks for the follow. Okay, so Carlsen decides he's going to take away the b1 square and the b2 square from the rooks. So rather than go to c3, as he did previously, if he goes to c3, then Duda would just repeat by going to b1, hitting the bishop. So Carlsen says, enough of that. I'm just going to park my king here and take away these two squares from black's pieces. And now he's all set to move his minor pieces. Bishop c2. Here we go. Now he's improving his minor pieces, and this, what I really like about this endgame is it really shows how to win a chess game, because a lot of chess games are not fantastic attacks where somebody crashes through, sacks a piece, and blows his opponent off the board. Like, that doesn't happen too often, especially at the Super Grandmaster level. The Super Grandmaster level, it's all about minor advantages and slowly and surely improving your position. And I think this is really instructive and really shows the level of patience that's required to play at a high level of chess. And it's something that I've tried to implement in my game is that skill of patience. You know, sometimes you get a position and you feel like, I got to do something. Well, maybe the something is just a quiet move. And a quiet move could be improving your bishop, like Carlsen did here. It's now off the back rank. So let's see how Carlsen slowly but surely improves the position of his pieces. Okay, there goes his knight. His knight is now on a more active square. It used to be in his territory. Now it's controlling some squares that black would like to hold on to. Chess Gambitier says, only in gambit chess is impatience a virtue. That's a very good point. Okay. Not really sure what's the idea. Okay, yes. So it seems a little strange to allow this pawn to march further up the board, but If white were to play a5, then black could come over here, attack the pawn again, and unfortunately white can't defend it a second time. So white would lose that pawn. So right now, Carlsen cannot push his a pawn further. So that's why he chose a different move. And I suspect he's going to put his rook behind this pawn. So he's got two passed pawns to choose from. And he saw that it was going to be a challenge to advance this guy further because black's doing a really nice job of defending against it. So he's rerouted his rook so that he could perhaps get this guy going. And Duda says, no, you're not doing that. I'm putting my rook right in front of the pawn. Carlsen improves the position of his king, taking away this square from the black king. Knight e2 check. And now rook h1. So rook behind the pass pawn. That's often a good strategy. So similarly to how white had a rook on a3 before, he's reinforcing the h-pawn now. And he had to do that because the knight is no longer on f4. The knight was protecting the passed pawn on h5. Now it's not doing that, so white had to defend that pawn somehow. So that's why he's got the rook behind the pawn. Okay, so if we compare this position to what it was, say, 10 moves ago, the white rook has gone from a3 to h1, and it's essentially doing the same thing that it was doing on a3, just holding on to its passed pawn. Hello, Larry, Destroyer of Worlds. So really nothing has changed that much for the rook, but if you look at the king and the minor pieces, it used to be the knight, the king, and the bishop were huddled on these three squares, and black had his rook on b1. We'll look at the placement of the pieces now. True, the knight is still on e2, but the king is in a much more active position, and the bishop has improved ever so slightly. So white is making some progress. It might be minute, but he is making progress. And this is what high-level chess is all about. Minor improvements. Okay, rook g8. Trying to hold the knight onto the g-pawn because the g-pawn is only defended by the knight. And now Carlsen decides, okay, I am going to sacrifice this pawn because I've got a tactic here where I'm going to win one of black's pawns. So at this position here, if we go back, Carlsen, he couldn't find a way to proceed further by advancing the h-pawn. He's like, okay, I'm stuck. I can't move this guy any further, and I really can't move this guy without supporting him. So I got to do something different. So what he's going to do is he's going to move his rook here, and he's going to try to lop off either the f5 pawn or the e4 pawn. So he's willing to trade the h-pawn if he can win one of these pawns that black has. So let's see what happens, guys. So Duda decides to go for it. He takes the h-pawn. And now bishop takes e4. Did Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, blunder a piece? Is that not a free bishop, folks? No, of course it's not, because if he takes, we see that the king is in line with the rook. So rook b5 would win this rook on h5. So Carlsen knows what he's doing. So obviously Duda did not take the bishop. He attacks the bishop with his rook. So now he's got both pieces lined up. But Carlsen's got it under control. He plays knight f4. attacks the rook. So he says, okay, you're going to take my bishop, I'm going to take your rook, and then it's going to be knight and rook against rook. So that would be a completely one endgame. White would just be up a piece. So obviously Duda did not go for that. He moved his rook. And now, does Carlsen move the bishop? I mean, it's being attacked by the rook and the pawn. So it would seem obvious that you got to move that bishop. Not necessarily. Can we find something better first? And we can, because we've got our king in line with black's king. We can push the king back. So the king, the black king currently is in a fairly nice spot. It's controlling some squares, or it's got influence on some squares in white's camp. But it would be nice if we could push it back, because then if we push it further into his camp, that means that he's not attacking squares in our camp. And so Carlsen does that first by checking the king, forcing the king back, and also consequently, he's now going to win this f-pawn, because he's got 2 pieces on the f-pawn. So he's going to trade the f-pawn for the g-pawn here. He takes the pawn and now plays king to d4. Now I think this is a finesse. I think he could have taken the c-pawn. I don't see anything offhand that is I don't believe there's anything here preventing him from taking that pawn. Rook f3. I think he's just got knight d3 there. But maybe he didn't want to give counterplay. I suspect that's what Carlsen was thinking during the game. He didn't want to give his opponent any further chances. And it's often a good idea to put your king in direct opposition of your opponent's king, because he's going to try to push him further back. So the king used to be on c5. We got a question. Chess Gambitier says, does he have rook to e5? Okay, let's have a look here. So I'm saying if white took, in this position, if white took on c4, does black have rook e5? Rook e5, I think white can play knight to d3. I think this is okay for white. Obviously, if black trades, that's what white wants. But it would be not ideal if this probably would be what black would want, though, because if white has to move the pawn to this file, that means the queening square is a black square, which is not the color of the bishop. And a lot of the times when you have a bishop, you want your pawn to be heading towards the queening square that's the same color of your bishop, because your bishop will want to control that square and maybe check the king. So I don't know if maybe there's some drawing chances here, perhaps. I suspect it was just a finesse by Carlsen. I suspect if we checked with the engine, king takes pawn is okay. But Carlsen, he just wants to push the king back further. You know, he's just making a small improvement. So push him back further, push him back further. Okay, so Duda is going to try to check from behind, perhaps. And you can see, look at this position, guys. We've gone from the starting position where white had the king here, the knight here, the bishop on that square, and black had a rook on b1. Just compare that position to what we have now. Look at how active the minor pieces are now. The minor pieces are influencing the middle of the board. Look at this bishop. This monster bishop is controlling so many squares. The king is active. Black's king is cut off from the 5th rank. All through minor improvements, just minor improvements, one piece at a time. That's really, I mean, you know, chess is a very complicated game, but some of the strategies are very simple, really. I mean, look at what piece of yours is not participating or is in a poor position, and how can you improve it? So Carlsen improves the position of his pieces by forcing black's king further away. So the black king used to be on c5, now it's on e7, so it's cut off from the 6th rank and beyond. It's running out of squares. Knight g6 check. Knight e5, and now Carlsen takes. So he decides to take that with the knight, and this is now a lot more clear. White is going to win this. He's got this passer. It's a light squared, queening square. He's going to be able to influence that square with his bishop. So let's check it out, guys. So Duda, he knows the end is near. Carlsen pushes. Just securing with his two minor pieces, or sorry, with two pieces rather. And he's going to bring his bishop and king over to the action. Bishop e4, slicing through these squares, and now he's all set to just move the king up to help out. So Duda does not want to allow the king up, so he puts his rook there. Carlsen cuts off black's king, so now black's king cannot participate. Bishop c2. He's rerouting the bishop. So he wants to play king to b2 to take away the a1 square from black, and then he'll be able to proceed with a6 and rook a5. So let's just make a move here for black. Let's just say black plays, let's say rook, let's say king back. So we could have king b2, rook e1. Now, the knight is being attacked by the rook. However, we have a tactic. We can push ahead. Because if black takes the knight, we've got bishop b3 lining it up with the king. And now we're all set to put our rook behind the pass pawn, and we're getting closer. So I suspect that was Carlsen's idea, wanting to take away the a1 square from this rook, because that rook was doing a good job of preventing the pawn from advancing further. Chess Gambitier, do you think sacking both rooks for the minor pieces works? Well, white would still have a rook himself, though, right? On move 69, can't black win two minor pieces for a rook? Okay, let's have a look, guys. Did I miss something? Oh, you mean right here? On move 69, so So in the game, Duda played rook f7. What are you guys wanting to look at? You want to look at rook takes bishop? Okay, so that's a good question, guys. So it does look like we can win 2 minor pieces. But look at this. The black king is cut off. The black king has been cut off by the rook, and he can't get over to help out. So white's going to be able to march his pawn, and then he's going to be able to build a bridge and convert this. So let's play a few moves here. Let's say check, check, check. Okay, the king could come up just to harass the rook, but we stay on this line. We don't want black's king from participating. Check. Okay. Now, black's king is way out of play. All we have to do is get a rook to b7. Now we're threatening the queen. So if black plays rook a2, we just queen. And he's going to run out of checks eventually because we're going to march our king towards the rook. Ba-boom! So now the rook has to move. And there's no way to stop a8 getting a queen next move. Good question, Ishchess. Good question. So Duda plays rook f7 in the game. That just prevents. That just makes it a lot faster because Carlsen with 2 pieces over a rook is going to win. So he exchanges knight a3, and here Duda resigned because even if black is able to sacrifice the rook for the pawn, knight and bishop is a 1 endgame. You can checkmate with knight and bishop, guys. So there we go. That was the second episode of Great Endgames. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was Carlsen against Duda from January of this year. And I think the takeaways from this endgame is it shows the power of 2 pieces versus a rook, and it also shows how grandmasters slowly improve their position over time. Just slowly, 1 move at a time, 1 piece at a time, not looking for, hey, does this move lead to an immediate win? Am I checkmating him in 5 moves? No. A lot of Grandmaster chess isn't like that. It's about how do I improve my position, or how do I make my opponent's position worse? And I thought that this endgame was a really good example by arguably one of the best ever to have played. How does he go about proving that the 2 pieces are superior to the rook? So I hope you guys enjoyed that. And that's going to be all for the Great Endgames segment.